I'm Jeffrey Washington, and welcome to Let's Talk Buddhism, a series where we'll discuss interesting issues in Buddhism as well as common misconceptions about it. I'm a student of Chan and Tiandai Buddhism. They'll have a broad range of interests, everything from Buddhist metaphysics to the philosophy of mind. And well, let's jump right into it and talk about the issue of this video, which is, what is the Buddha's take on God? Alright, so let's have a look at two common misconceptions about God in Buddhism. First, that the Buddha was agnostic. So if we look at this article by the Secular Buddhist Network, they're basically saying the Buddha was agnostic and he never answered the question of God. And the second misunderstanding that we'll have a look at here is this video by this YouTube creator who is basically saying that Buddhism isn't a religion because we don't believe in God.
Buddhists don't even believe in God, so it is more of a mindfulness practice rather than a religion, and is close to atheism in that respect.
So, was the Buddha really silent on the issue of God? Well, if we look into the Buddhist literature, that is not the case. Both in the Pali Canon as well as the Mahayana Sutras, we find that Buddha denies the existence of God. For example, in the Brahmajala Sutta, where the Buddha describes 62 kinds of mistaken views popular in his day, he lists God creating the world and the existence of God among them. So, in one of these 62 false views, the Buddha says that there was once a powerful god named Brahma, the first god to come into existence in the new formation of a universe. He sees the universe forming around him, and as the first being in that universe, he thinks he's the cause of that world. But the problem is, he's not really God as we think of it. He's not eternal, he's not permanent, and he's not a creator. And more importantly, he has a finite lifespan. As he dies and passes away, he's reborn as a human being who becomes a great meditator. As he meditates, he sees into his past lives, and particularly that life he had as Brahman, where he saw the world forming around him. That meditator, seeing this, believed that Brahman is the creator of the world. What he was seeing wasn't a past life, but rather a vision he had of God creating the world. And through this partial knowledge, he thought, there is a creator to the world, and that creator is God, or Brahman. In another sutta of the Pali Canon, the Citta Sutta, the Buddha brings up the classic problem of evil. He said that if God really existed, he created all the evil, terrible things that happen in the world. So if we relied on him for our spiritual progress, all that would happen is we would become bewildered and hindered in our religious cultivation. And then in the Mahayana Sutras, we can look to the Lankavatara Sutra, where somebody asks Buddha about popular theories on causation during the day, such as God being the cause of the world, or time, the self, or the material elements being the fundamental cause of the world. The Buddha says that while he does teach causation, he doesn't teach these kinds of mistaken causation. So he thinks that the existence of God and God's creation of the world is a mistaken view. And another text is the Inquiry of Lotadara, where the Buddha says that no phenomena ever came into existence in the first place, that all things are uncreated, and from this we can understand that there's no creator God, because nothing was ever created. So we see the Buddha rejected the idea of a God, but let's look a little bit deeper and understand the reasoning behind why he did so. So we've already mentioned something called dependent origination, and that is the most fundamental teaching of the Buddha, and it is precisely why he rejected the existence of a God. And we have to understand dependent origination from two perspectives. First is the conventional, and the second is the ultimate. The conventional truth is the truth that applies to us ordinary people. It's how we see and understand the world. And the ultimate truth applies to the perceptual experience of enlightened beings, which is really totally different than how we see the world. So first we'll go through the conventional truth, which is a bit easier to understand, and then we'll briefly discuss the ultimate truth, okay? So in the conventional truth, what we consider to be the underlying principle of the world is that of dependent origination. On the face of it, it's quite simple to understand. Everything that exists must come into existence dependent on something else. As the Buddha said, when this is, that is. When this ceases to be, that ceases to be, okay? So we'll divide this into 4 levels. On the first level, all things require cause. Quite simple. An apple tree needs an apple for it to grow out, okay? But also, the apple tree doesn't come out just by the apple seed, but of quite a lot of other conditions as well. So that's the second level. Things don't arise from a single cause, they arise from a multitude of conditions. So the apple seed needed also soil, sunlight, fertilizer for it to successfully grow into an apple tree. And then on the third level is something called causal equality. Whatever is a cause is itself a result, and whatever a result is itself a cause. So that means the apple tree is a result because it was caused by the apple seed, but it's also a cause. It's a cause for future apples. That way, it's at the same time a cause as well as a result. There's never a cause that's not a result, and never a result that's not a cause. And on the fourth level is something called necessary causation. That means when the conditions are present, it is necessary for its result to come about. Let's take the example of my eye. If I have a healthy eye, there's something in front of me, let's say my screen in this case, and there's plenty of light in the room, I'll always have a perceptual experience, whether I want to or not. No matter how much I tell myself, I don't want to see my computer, the computer is always there for me. Of course, I can take the conditions away, I can close my eyes, I can turn off the light, and then that visual experience will not happen. But that means the conditions were not present for the visual experience. If the conditions are present, my eyes are open, the light's on, I'll always see what's in front of me. Okay? So now we've understood these four principles. All things must have a cause. Things need multiple conditions for it to arise. Causes and results are equal. That means a cause must be a result and a result must be a cause. And fourth, whenever the conditions are present, the result must come about. So let's see how these four principles contradict the idea of a God. So first, all things must have a cause. And if God is a thing, he is existent, then of course he must himself need a cause. But that is not what proponents of God suggest. They say that God is perfect by himself and he is the uncaused cause of all the things in the world. But that contradicts every other kind of cause we've observed in the world. We've never ever seen a cause that itself is not a result of something else. It itself needed to be caused for it to exist. So that directly contradicts the idea of God, even on the most basic level of dependent origination. And then if we look at the second level of dependent origination, things needing multiple conditions to come about, then God couldn't have been the creator of the world, since if God was the first thing to exist, there were no other conditions around to support him creating the world, meaning he was a singular cause of a multitude of conditions. But that again is not the case of how causality works. Whenever something arises, it arises from a multitude of conditions. The apple seed didn't just create a tree by itself in the vacuum of space. It needed soil, it needed sunlight, it needed fertilizer. So we reject the idea of God being the sole cause of the world. And then the third thing is causal equality, similar to what we said in the first place about God, that he needed himself a cause because he is a cause himself, right? Because if he was a cause, he would also be a result. That means there must have been something that caused God if he were to cause other things, since we know that whatever is the cause is a result. Just like the apple seed is the cause to create the apple tree, itself must be the result of another apple tree that came before it. So it's both a cause and a result. But of course, God himself is just a cause and not a result. Okay? And the final absurd result of God is that he violates necessary causation. This is because if God created the world, there would be no other conditions that existed prior to his creation of that world, meaning God is the only necessary cause for the world. And being eternal, this cause would be always present, and we know that when the causes of a result are present, that result will always arise. So God should be creating the world constantly, everywhere, all the time. Why? Because he is eternal and the sufficient cause for all the world. But this would have the absurd consequence of him always creating the world in every moment, since he always exists. But that is not how we see the world. We don't see new worlds being created in every second, everywhere in the universe, so it can't be the case that God created the world when we take into consideration the principles of dependent origination. So we've had a look at dependent origination and God from the conventionalist perspective. In the conventional truth, we admit to things that are truly existent, things that arise dependent on conditions and discrete entities. But when we move on to the ultimate truth, we negate what has already discussed in the conventional truth. That is our ordinary perception of discrete entities, of things arising from causes, and instead propose the exact opposite. Nothing ever arose into existence from any cause whatsoever, and all things are empty of their own existence. Now, from this, again, the idea of God is contradicted, because generally proponents of God want to say that God is the creator of the world, he is the sustainer of the world. But in Buddhism, in the ultimate truth, there is no world at all. What we say is all things are unarisen and uncreated, so there is no need at all for a God. And in addition, we actually have a kind of similarity between the idea of God and ultimate truth, because in the ultimate truth, what we say is all things are non-arisen and does not cease. They have no beginning and they have no end. But we're no longer talking about discrete entities that depend on conditions, but reality as it is, free from a conceptual proliferation. So as Buddhists, we do propose something that is without change, something that has no beginning, but it is not something separate from the world itself. It is just all there is within the world, with all its sights and all its sounds, apart from our conceptual proliferation, rather than a kind of eternal entity that exists outside of the world and acts as its creator. So if Buddhism doesn't believe in God, where does that leave us? Is it just some kind of mindfulness exercise? Well, as we've seen, that's definitely not the case, since dependent origination is a very comprehensive worldview all on its own. But in the place of God, what did the Buddha have to say about creation? Well, he taught of an infinite process of creation and destruction of old and new universes that's quite similar to the modern big bounce model of physics. What he taught was that every universe has a process of formation, stability, and destruction. And as that old universe becomes destroyed, a new universe forms in its place. This cycle continues endlessly without beginning nor end. It posits an infinite process. This is a process that is totally in line with our laws of causality. Every cause is itself caused, and each cause acts as a multitude of conditions that always generates a future result when the correct conditions are present. In this way, it's more parsimonious to our understanding of causation and does not posit any entities that require unique justification to violate these laws. So now, I hope it's clear what the Buddhist position on creation and God was. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please leave them down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe.